I'm Joe Sestak, a sailor, 31 years, loved it. I was a congressman for a few years, and I came out here to say a few words at the Thorium Energy Alliance.
I can't tell you how delighted I am that Joe Sestak agreed to take a day out of his extraordinarily busy schedule to come and speak to us here at the Thorium Energy Alliance. Joe's an admiral in the United States Navy. He served for 2 terms in the Congress of the United States, and if you look at his record, you will be shocked that there's still somebody that honorable left in that building. And unfortunately, he's not left in that building. He almost got into the Senate for the state of Pennsylvania, overcoming unbelievable odds and having to fight his own party, not to put too fine a point on it, but getting some encouragement not to run from folks in the administration. And it's to read what he went through and to get so close is just heartrending. He's the most principled politician I know, and the USA will be lucky as a nation in 2014 when he wins the Senate, because he is running again. So let's give a hand for... So I don't even know what to call it. It's like Congressman Admiral, sir. But thank you.
Understudy to Katie is good. John, thanks very much, and everybody, thanks for having me here today to the Thorium Energy Alliance. You might imagine it's a little tough to get up here after that presentation. I probably will get 0 questions. It kind of reminds me of a story about an understudy up on Broadway that they finally get their chance. The main star is sick, and they tell him, you're going to do it the next day. So he sends out telegrams to everybody, all his friends. And when he gets to the theater, nobody's there. So he goes back to his dressing room, and he finds the car. One person has answered the telegram and said, thanks for the warning. So after watching, look, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm actually glad that I did follow Katie. Because I think she represents the best of our national treasure, which is our youth, but also because of the unique characteristic that youth have. They are not burdened with experience. And I use that phrase consciously. You know, in those 31 years in the U.S. military, I lived with the youth of America. Come aboard an aircraft carrier that was in my carrier battle group for the war. 5,000 sailors. Their average age was 19 and a half. I lived with them, I worked with them, I went to war with them. Before a pilot got into the plane to take off, you didn't even ask a question whether they had fixed your plane properly at 19 and a half. You just saluted, knowing the job had been done, and off you went over the skies of Afghanistan and Iraq. And then they ran a nuclear reactor. I put my head down at night about 100 feet away from that reactor. We had made it sailor-proof. We knew routines and procedures. We were experienced and knew that we would not have, nor ever did have, an accident. So then I went to Congress about 5 years later, and I saw the other side of that experience, the burden of it. Because in 2007, as I got to Congress a few months later, this group came in and started talking to me about thorium, and I am not a nuclear-trained officer. But I thought, this is interesting. It captured several of the elements that I think are most important for us as we're trying to come to grasp with our energy policy. First, it made us much more secure in our independence. It looked like it could if we were to pursue this. Second, the affordability seemed very interesting. I mean, at the time, they were throwing out some facts that needed to be validated that said, you know, this could cost 1/4 of what it does for a normal reactor, a uranium, in its construction. The cost of it might be just 50% for the production of the electricity, and the operating cost would be as little as 2 to 3%. And then, most attractive also, was it was relatively clean. It could be a breeder that would actually produce more fuel than what it's using. But in that fuel that you're putting into it, you could rip out all that other stuff in storage that's dirty and put it in here and have de minimis proliferation concerns. As U-233 and 232, and the gaseous vapors from that 232 don't make it as weapon likely. And then you actually have much less fissile material sitting around. So then I said, well, we need to have a study on this, because in the military you learn to expect what you inspect. And I wanted to know, was this just not another group coming in? Is there really something here? And so I worked with the Armed Services Committee that I was on in order to get a study placed into it. And I could work for the votes to have it done. And then it went over to the deep freeze, the United States Senate. And there it wasn't only frozen in time, but the U.S. Navy reached in with its experience, the burden of it, to remove it. That's why I'm a great believer in the youth of America. They are not burdened with experience, but that is your challenge. He called it imperceptible blindness or whatever it was. It is this burden of experience. I just don't think, though, that's a challenge for you. It's a challenge for all of America today. Because what's occurred is we no longer govern, for example, from the U.S. Senate or the other places down there in Washington, D.C. We confront our challenges only in a crisis. We even have a shorthand lexicon for it. Fiscal cliff, debt ceiling, supercommittee, sequester, Sandy Hook. Rather than preventing crisis and addressing our challenges, we tend to react to them and even then not successfully meet them. The lack of accountability is awesome down there. There tends to be no more of that pragmatic leadership that one learns in the military, where there's great variance of ideas, but you also come together in a principled compromise to make sure that the mission's accomplished, to where there's a sense of, this is where we are. And based on the facts, here's what we've got to do. And these are the benchmarks that we have to achieve, and hold me accountable in achieving them. We used to have that at some time, even within our energy policy. Take the early 70s, when we had that massive recession that occurred because we had our first oil blockade where OPEC turned off the spigot. They didn't have to close the Straits of Hormuz. They just said, we're not going to sell oil. And out of that, in the Ford administration, they said, we've got to begin to look at what has become the golden grail, energy independence. And one part of that was natural gas. They knew that those more readily available sources of natural gas would disappear soon. And so they began a crusade to look at, can we actually get gas out of shale? And your United States government, beginning in the Ford administration, for 25 years gave $10 billion of tax credits to private industry to try to bring this about. Your United States government opened up its labs and said, come on in. We will jointly develop the diamond bit drill by which you go down 3,000 feet. And our national, including our defense industries, help them develop in the government. Then when you go sideways, the seismographic imaging tool that's needed to see what can be done and where you're going to explode those small little devices. And so what occurred is all of a sudden we had a natural gas that is so abundant today that last week for the first time we actually approved a refinery down in the south to no longer to turn liquefied gas as it's imported into vapors, the gas. We now have given it permission to go the opposite way and convert it for exports. So within a decade, we will be energy independent. Again, it met 3 criteria. It helped make us secure and independent in our own energy supply. Number 2, it is affordable. It, not regulations, is what's made coal less likely to be in demand here in America because of the cost. And 3rd, it is cleaner of fossil fuels, you well know, by 50%. So because of that, I tend to have come to look at thorium a little differently than I did in 2007. To me, it's become in conjunction with rare earth minerals and national security issue under the following heading. That again in the military you learn that amateurs do tactics, experts do logistics. Take Napoleon. 2 days every month, this greatest general of almost all time would sit down and for 2 whole days do nothing but go through the logistical reports. Was enough feed brought forward for the horses? Did I have enough wood to go over to build bridges to go over fjords? Did I have the right bullets and the beans? Take Desert Storm. And the Marine Corps put a 3-star general in charge of logistics. General Clark did such an amazing job in logistics that he became head of the commandant, that is, of the Marine Corps, basically a supply officer. Amateurs do tactics, experts do logistics. And to me, this is most important when you think about our national security that is so dependent upon our economic security and look west. I can remember backpacking through China in the mid-1980s. I was in between ships. I had 60 days with nothing to do and had a lot of accrued leave. So I flew into Beijing and about a month later came out in Hong Kong because it was the very first year they permitted Americans to travel by themselves in the mid-80s. I can remember going into a supermarket there, on Chongqing, Wuhan, one of those places. And in the state store, you could see these scrawny pieces of lettuce and tiny little tomatoes because that was the year they permitted 20% of what you grew to be kept and sold on your own. The rest you sold to the supermarket. And right behind the supermarket as I went there were the plump chickens with the ripe tomatoes, the humongous lettuces. And I said, they're going to be great capitalists. But think about it. You can go to Africa, where my wife works at times as an international environmentalist, actually cleaning up, and she works up trying to clean some of this radiation that the Soviet Union left behind near our Scandinavian countries with their submarines. They just latched to the pier there, letting them rot with the reactors. But there the Chinese sit in Africa, soaking up the minerals. Take South America, or continue over to the other side, where they have identified the South China Sea as, in their words, a core interest. That is the same term they use for Taiwan, which they want to own. They don't treat the South China Sea as an international waterway. To them, it's an inland China Sea. Why? Because of the rich minerals and resources that are under it. It's why we've had 4 naval conflicts already, with Vietnam, the Philippines, and other countries to the north, like Japan. I sat yesterday in a briefing because I care about, I feel I was one of the custodians for a while, about our marine life out there, to where the Chinese have even soaked up throughout this great commons of our seas what's called forage fish, the things like anchovies. That bigger fish feed upon and bigger fish feed upon. So you might have read an article about a month ago where sharks are disappearing because that little beginning of the food chain for them is disappearing. As almost 80% of all the anchovies, for example, are brought into China as their fishing fleets go out and bring it up, or they get access rights and bring it all back to China to feed their growing cattle and others that to feed their growing population. I bring this up because it's not unlike a monopoly. They are very good capitalists. And when we had capitalists in the late 1800s, they did certain things that if you didn't want to pay the price, they'd just cut you off. So Japan didn't want to pay the price of giving up those disputed islands to Japan, so they just cut off rare earth minerals. When I came here today, I got in my hybrid car. It had a rare earth mineral in it. I got on a plane and its turbine had a rare earth mineral in it. I called my wife before I took off and said, I love you, because I'm a surface guy, not normally a pilot, and said, I love you. And then I got here and opened up my computer, and it also, with that cell phone, had a rare earth mineral in it. We don't do too bad. We produce enough rare earth mineral here in America to take care of ourselves. That's not the point. The point is, as you opened up the paper today, the headline, and the one I read was tech firms coming back to America from China. You read it a couple months ago, you saw other types of manufacturing firms beginning to come back because wages are rising. And at times it might be better to come back here. But what won't come back here is the supply of rare earth minerals. Not only that, but China is doing some amazing things. 1/3 of all the rare earth minerals it exports to the world, because it controls 97%, as you know. 1/3 of it is by smuggling. They are cutting down on that vigorously right now. And they have stopped all surveys of new lands to see if they can find new sources of rare earth minerals. It's a monopoly. Less out there, you can control the price. It's stopping its competitor, the smugglers. So for me, this issue of thorium with rare earth minerals has to be looked at as a national security issue. And much like the government had a role to play when it wanted to begin our journey towards energy independence with, like, for example, natural gas, I believe in a national security interest, government has a role to play. But it has to do a number of things. First, it really does need to look at and understand that rare earths cannot be separated, or very hard to do, from thorium. They come together because on the whole they're mined together. Second, having recognized that as one of the facts, the other one to recognize is what we want from thorium is to recognize that, yes, it is radioactive. It has alpha. It has an isotope, thallium, that gives some beta in it, but it doesn't have gamma. And so you begin to work yourself through that it needs to be classified properly so it can be utilized with more ease. Proper protection, but more ease, so that we can use it properly for heat processes. And second, since it comes with the rare earth minerals, then increasingly we don't want only to secure our own domestic supply, but what we really need to do is become the global competitor in order to provide rare earth products like the cell phone. We are the nation that discovered the solar power panel. We are the nation that discovered the wind turbine, where 400 tons of steel sit in it. But when you begin to think about what goes into them, they all both have rare earth minerals. And so you may know today that China is the #1 exporter, even though we discovered it, of both solar power panels and of wind turbines. So the concept is, if you want to believe that manufacturing might come back, there's a piece of it that won't unless we have our own logistical chain line here in America. And last, I think what we have to do is recognize, or try to have that recognition be out there, that this is not a threat. Rather, it's an asset to other types of energy we have here in America. So, for example, all energy, as I mentioned almost, or I think I might have mentioned, uses rare earth minerals. It doesn't matter whether it's a nuclear reactor or petroleum fracking, whether it's a magnet or whether it's advanced alloys used in a turbine. We also have to make it very clear that molten salt reactors, or what we come forward with, does not pose a threat, and rather can only enhance and make cleaner and more utility for other types of energy, who should be an ally in this. So you begin to have, can coal become liquid fuel? Can you better extract natural gas as you go from the Marcellus Shale to the Utica Shale? Are you able then to have that refinery that has just been given permission to go from liquid to gas, to go from gas to liquid now? Are you able then to use the heat process of thorium in order to have it go that way more easily? The concrete, the fertilizer production, as you move into desalination and hydrogen production, it has an immense role to play if you focus it upon its heat processes. So as I summarize, at least my viewpoint, I do think that thorium with rare earths, of where I've evolved to, as someone who cares about the national security of America, has a way to enhance greatly the accessibility of our energy in so many fields, not just nuclear power. And along with that, give us the material source we need to remain and be the greatest of global competitors as we begin our manufacturing prowess once more. To do it, 4 things is what I'd leave with. First, I really do believe amateurs do tactics, experts do logistics. I don't care if it's a war campaign or a political campaign. Experts do logistics. This is an economic logistical issue for our national security. It's a source, both energy and rare earth minerals. Second, I so believe in pragmatic leadership, where you're American before you're partisan, to where you understand that this is where we are. This, based on the facts, is what we have to do. And these are the benchmarks by which we should be held accountable. So to me, recognizing that, but also recognizing, as Katie well pointed out, the burden of experience we have. My average staff was about 22 years old. I went back to teaching at Carnegie Mellon and Cheney University in Dickinson, so I'd be with youth. They're not only invigorating, but they're not burdened with experience. But so is the allies who should be with you all in this effort, the manufacturers and energy industry. They have to be part of the coalition. And then finally, at least for me, what I really believe you saw with natural gas, and what at times even this industry needs to recognize, that is the special character of America that I saw all the time in the United States military. SEAL Team 6, rugged individuals, but always aligned for the common mission. They had each other's back. I believe that's what America is when we're at our best. Is we value rugged individuals where government does not interfere with the negative parts of how it can interfere. But at times, government, held accountable, can actually advance the opportunity for individuals. Abraham Lincoln did it with landmark universities, building the railroads. President Eisenhower did it with student loans that he called defense student loans, as he originated the student loan program. And he did it with the interstate highway system, which he called the defense interstate highway system. So after World War II and Korea, we could quickly, more rapidly respond to get things to where we had to. But by the way, it had great opportunity, particularly for small businesses, as he even established a small business administration, because he knew that no longer would be corporations, it would be entrepreneurs and small businesses that would begin, as they do today, create 60% of all new jobs. So my take at the end is we are a nation of rugged individuals, but we tend to build tall ladders together and have people who are brave enough to climb them on their own. I saw it every day in the military. But all we ask at times, and Washington fails at this, is to help build higher, more rungs for those who succeed so that people can climb, like Katie, our children, even higher. And I think, like they did in natural gas, this is something that truly is a national security issue and has to be addressed that way for the good of America. So thank you. And as I said, I couldn't even tell you what thorium was before 2007. But because of a simple presentation that came in, it just seemed to me that it was a decent idea that needed to be studied. But right now it seems to be roadblocked. So thank you very much, and at least give me one question so Katie doesn't make me feel bad.
Joe, I'm very interested in your comments about natural gas. Obviously, in Pennsylvania, as most people know, you're sitting on top of the Marcellus Shale formation there, and that's a huge vested interest for the people of Pennsylvania, but also for the natural gas industry. I think you talked a lot about energy security, but there's also the issue of climate change, which is another very, very important issue. And as you correctly said, natural gas is getting us away from coal, and that's doing a lot of good for our efforts to clean up CO2 production in the United States. But do you see, as most people in this room feel, I think thorium energy presents the possibility of where we can possibly create our energy with virtually no CO2 production at all. Do you see any kind of conflict between fossil fuel interests that are behind shale gas development might be conflicting with the potential for thorium energy development?
I think the answer to that is yes. Fossil fuel, as you know, I said natural gas has 50% less CO2 emissions and others than fossil fuels. But when you actually add in what it costs to extract it, that 50% goes up. And it depends upon the study and who does it, whether it's 100 and equal to coal or somewhat just 60 or 70%. So it's not quite 50%, number one. Climate change, I believe, is a national security issue also. And you're absolutely spot on. Navy spending $250 million or some number, don't quote me on that exact number, trying to protect its piers in Norfolk. It's an economic issue because cows produce less milk when the temperature goes up. Apples, they need cold weather during winter to rejuvenate themselves. So this issue is not a tree hugger issue. This issue is serious on climate change. So the answer in a perfect world is, I think you're spot on. Look, I am someone who's very comfortable with nuclear power. As I said, I slept on a ship. We made it sailor-proof. You go on an aircraft carrier A or an aircraft carrier B, the knob is in the same place. We made them sailor-proof. Standardization. So I do think, and that's why I was also interested in thorium. However, this natural gas, not done well, by the way. As you know, there's a Halliburton loophole where EPA is forbidden to have any oversight whatsoever under the Clean Water Drinking Act to even walk in and see if the clean water is being polluted. And mind you, does it create jobs? Absolutely. But remember this, 2,000 of those jobs will be permanent. Once those 462 guys drill that drill, they go to another drill. And 82% in Pennsylvania come from out of state. So this isn't a panacea, but it is a transition, I believe. A serious transition that is going to happen. And I think it is because it would take to get a molten salt reactor even approved under today's unwieldy regulatory environment, 10 years. I mean, how long have you been working with Congress? I mean, I tried to do a study in 2007, it was pulled out. They have been trying to work down there. I've met with them a couple times, they stopped to see me, and so I do think there will be conflict. Remember also who's investing in natural gas. Hedge funds from Hong Kong, China, Finland, England. So there's a lot more than just our down here. Is there going to be conflict? Yes, these are the interests. But that's why I believe you have got to get allies aboard, and the best ones are unlikely bedfellows. And it's got to be the other energy to try to sell it in a way that this can enhance what you can do with coal. And we're exporting it now to Germany because we're not using it here. But the key here is to make them, that we can liquefy it. This is a tough battle.
You mentioned the study done in the House of Representatives that got put in the Senate, deep freeze. Is that study available to the public?
No, here's what was done. I put in 2 studies. I wanted the military to study it. We have been trying to develop, and I've been involved in electromagnetic guns. That's why we built an electric ship, which got canceled after three of them because it's so expensive. We want to develop a laser, and it's very hard to do laser at sea. You're a scientist, I'm not, but the vapor affects a laser. But this, trying to shoot a bullet against a bullet, isn't going to last very long when the Chinese have already developed an ability to target an aircraft carrier battle group with an ICBM, a ballistic missile. So you've got to go to laser. And to have something that's smaller, modular, potentially, and you could place on it, is the way to go. So I wanted it studied in the military. There was another one I put in the Department of Energy. Now, I've left Congress and I'm getting older and I forget things. But that study, in my memory, got through. Because after it got through, I then said, we've got to follow them. Because I used to work in the Pentagon, and we get a study, and we just knew that Congress would forget about it. And you have to stay on top of them. That study, sir, I think is still out there and was never done. I got into a Senate race and things like that, but the military one was a direction to do the study. It laid it all out. I worked with some people of what they had to study to compare it and all that. I didn't just say do a study. That got taken out because there was opposition from the Naval Service. It's the nuclear side. The Admiral Ricko, who did great things, but that was back then.
To what extent is this thorium rare earth discussion headlining your platform? I mean, let's face it, the average guy in Eaton Park restaurant in Pittsburgh is not saying, gee, I wish we could get some thorium molten salt reactors, and if only we had a politician who would be brave enough to say that. So is this really leading your campaign, or to what extent is it driving your run for office?
I feel like my answer would be the same as Katie, where she had that long pause when you asked her for friends, what her friends thought about it. I mean, I mentioned it yesterday. I'm very interested in education. I was on the education committee. I had a Deep Blue, the Navy's anti-terrorism unit, after 9/11. So they wanted me on the intelligence committee. And I said, no, I want out of that. I want an education committee, and I'll be in armed services. Because education's the long pole in the tent. You could see that right here. I bring that up because I'm working on an issue on education. I was at a board, and I brought up to somebody thorium. And the eyes understandably glaze over. I was on the phone here as I was coming here, and somebody said, what are you doing in Chicago? I said, well, I flew out this morning. I'm going to fly back. I'll be back by 4 or 5 this afternoon. And I said, so I'm here at the thorium conference, and there's this pause. So when people are holding on to jobs, it isn't what you lead with. But I did run on the following. National security begins at home, in health, education, economic, and environmental energy security. They gave us healthy youth, by which we have defense security. That's true national security. And then, depending upon the audience, is what I speak about. Marcellus Shale, I was supportive of it, but in the military you learn, don't have piss poor planning. Plan well, have everybody there to find out what damage is. So anthracite mining that we had in Pennsylvania that left us with $12 billion of dirty tributary waters doesn't happen again. And you know what's happened with some of the contamination with methane and other things. So I talk about that because that was the issue that was hammered. Have I talked of groups in the past 2 years? Probably, I would say 50, 60 times of somebody. It's a very hard one. It isn't exactly what I lead with. Do I shy away from it? No. I'm very obvious. I'm saying I support nuclear power. You don't find that in my party very much. You could see the energy bill that we passed in 2008, was it? Didn't have any nuclear, really very little on it. And I think that this is a real selling point for it. The relative cleanliness that it can eat up all that bad plutonium, etc., is pretty good stuff.
I have some personal experience with the opposition. When I ran in the New Hampshire primary, I had a radio interview canceled, and then I found out that it was the Petroleum Institute that was their sponsor. So between being scheduled and the actual event, it got canceled. But my question is a different one. How do we engage our congressmen and congresswomen in this subject? The only way I've been able to get them is I wrote a really pissed off letter around midnight one night that seemed to strike a chord with my own congresswoman. So are there tricks?
Yeah, this is my recommendation. A lot of people have asked me that question. I really do think it's a matter of strange bedfellows. The way some of the energy bills got passed is they brought in 32 flag and general officers who said this is a national security issue. When I ran against my party's desires, against Senator Specter, so I wasn't allowed to speak in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh to the regular committees. That's 42% of the vote. So I went to 250 churches, mosques, temples, synagogues. The businesses to roll in on are absolutely critical for you. You want to somehow get them to be the ones that push it. Most often people come to Congress and they say, I got 80 congressmen to sign this. The same set of you know, I have 80 senators say we shouldn't have any more nuclear weapons, or 80 congressmen. Yeah, well, who are they? You know, one from Massachusetts, one, you know what I'm saying? They're the likely ones always sign, but they don't have the heft to make the ones you really need move. And that's, so pick those ones out. And often they, in your case, I think it's the business, the energy, people like that. Is that of any help? Could I end then with one last thing before, my biggest thing is I think John, having Katie and seeing Jim Kennedy's children over there, I only want to leave you with something, and this is what I think why you feel concerned. You all aren't getting, at least I feel you aren't, a fair hearing. To your question is, you start to talk about thorium, you know? And what is thorium? I'll bet you if you leave here and ask your taxi cab driver, they won't know what thorium is. I did. I asked the guy coming out here, by the way. He was an African immigrant, but, you know, but I'll leave you with this, why I'm a big believer that this change is going to happen. You know, as I came in on the subway today, and from the airport, I watched at each subway platform, people, 90%, 80% of the people were into their iPhone, you know. A wonderful Time magazine article came out 2 years ago about the young generations coming up. It's called the me generation, because it's all about me and iPhone and Facebook and all this. I think they got it wrong. And is that I think that, as you saw her up here and how her answers came back, it's not that they diss authority. They just don't feel it has earned their respect. And there's a difference. It's not like my generation, as I graduated from high school and, you know, went off to the military in Vietnam era. It was, we wanted to overthrow the establishment. They don't even care about the establishment because the establishment has let them down too much. And so my take is, this is really important present day, you need those others, but it is this younger. And I'll leave you with a story on an aircraft carrier. These kids are great. When you get in a plane, you turn, for those who've ever, you know, been in the Navy, you know, you turn on your engines, the pilot does. And then they hook you up to that catapult that flings you like a great sling into the air. And sometimes just before they sling you off, they got to tell you to shut down because something's wrong. So the young 19-and-a-half-year-old youth comes and unhooks the plane from the catapult, but it's under the belly of the plane, and you can't see down there. But you don't want to turn off your engines till you make sure you're unhooked. Because if you turn off your engines and somebody makes a mistake, you go off without your engines turning, you're not coming home. And so that young youth then walks to the front of the plane after unhooking where you can't see and gives a very simple signal like this, standing in front of the plane, and then stands there until the fuselage opens up and the young pilot's on deck safely. And that kid has said everything that you're facing, or the lack thereof, in Washington to get a fair hearing. And that is, hey, I'm responsible, the kid says. Well, who doesn't say that? But it also says I'm willing to be accountable. And if I made a mistake and you start heading overboard to your life, to your death, before you get safely on deck, you're going right through me. And I will go overboard with you also to my own death. It's that lack of accountability I feel in DC, for waiting for crises to show up before they're willing to do what's right and listen, because they're worried about who's got more money on the other side to beat them in a primary, never mind a general election. That I think is ailing, you know, this nation right now. And I think you're part of it. You're new. Why go against anything? What's the gain for them? The gain is for America, and I hope you keep at it. Thank you very much.
Joe,